Get us started, and then we're going to have our entities introduce themselves and start their meetings. So I really appreciate everybody in attendance. This is the Hayden Area Regional Sewer Board workshop. It is March 17th, 2023. The time is 8:05 a.m. I'm calling this meeting to order. In attendance are Commissioners Brooks, Matari, and Duncan. Commissioner Brooks is joining us by telephone. And so now I would let Hayden Area Regional Sewer Board call their meeting to order, and then I guess I've already done that with Kootenai County, so go ahead, Steph.
City of Hayden?
Yes.
Hayden Lake Sewer District?
Yes.
And Kootenai County?
Yes. All right, City of Hayden?
Mayor Purcell?
Here.
Council President Roeder?
Here.
Councilmember DePriest?
Here.
Councilmember Satterfield?
Here.
And Councilmember White? Here.
All right, and then Hayden Lake Sewer District?
Chairman Sharp,
Yes, ma'am.
Board Member Coleman,
Here.
Board Member Neal,
Here.
Board Member Meany.
All right. Would it be helpful to go around and introduce ourselves, or are we kind of, from roll call, know who each other? Thoughts? All right, well,
I'd like to do names.
okay, start with Danielle.
Hi there, I'm Danielle Quaid, I'm an attorney at Holly Coxwell, and I've been the bond counsel on this project, both the Hayden and the service.
Scott Purcell.
Sandra White?
Roger Satterfield, City Council member for Hayden and HARSB.
Hayden DePriest, Hayden City Council.
Brett Boyer, City Administrator. I'm Matt Roeder with the Hayden City Council and the number 2 position on HARSB for the city.
I'm Fonda Jovic, I'm legal counsel for the City of Hayden.
Alan Sovereign, Public Works Director for the City of Hayden.
Bruce Matari, County Commissioner.
Leslie Duncan, County Commissioner and HARSB member.
Benjamin Allen,
Bill Brooks, County Commissioner.
Thanks, Bill.
Could people please turn on their mics so we can hear?
Yes,
So we want green here?
you do, but you've already spoken, so it will feedback. So yes, when we go to speak, let's just make sure our phones are on. Okay.
Jim Coleman.
All right, your microphone needs to be.
It's green. Jim
Okay.
Coleman, Hayden Lake Sewer District Board member.
Ed Short, Chair for the district and sit on HARSB as well.
Barb Neal, Hayden Lake Sewer District Board Member.
Bill Meany, Hayden Lake Sewer District member.
Okay. All right. That's introductions. Changes to the agenda. Are there any? I would ask if there's any audience members who came here expecting to make public comments. Ready? Nope. All right, then I would ask to remove item E, which is public comment. It was not meant to be on our agenda anyway. And so if, are there any objections to that? Okay, hearing none. Well, I guess I'm going all out of order today. We just got done with introductions, and so we'll get right into business. I expect to take breaks about every hour to hour and a half, depending on where we fall in the program. And at this point, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Benjamin Allen, our moderator and our HARSB attorney.
Perfect, thanks Leslie. Well, first off, thank you to everybody for being here this morning. I think as I look around the room, there are some faces that I know well. There are some faces that I'm seeing for the first time today. And because of that, I think that there's probably some varying degrees of knowledge and understanding for the HARSB entity, its history, what its functions are, and how it operates. In light of that, HARSB had an opportunity to really discuss how this meeting this morning would be most beneficial for all of the members present, and determined that perhaps some basis of understanding as part of our presentation this morning would be beneficial for all of the members to hear. Obviously, if you're very familiar with HARSB, you're not in a position where you're likely to learn a whole lot. If you're not as familiar, hopefully this will give you some knowledge base by which it's easier to understand some of the discussions that are going on, some of the terms that are used, and those sorts of things. So with that said, we've got two individuals in this room that I want to start by introducing everybody to, because they really are the pinnacle of knowledge when it comes to our wastewater treatment facility. The first one is Ken Windrum, and he's actually going to take the mic over from me here in just a moment and give you guys a presentation. Ken has been in wastewater treatment specialties for over 40 years. He's been with the board for 14, correct, Ken? And anything that's needed to be known about the plant itself or how it functions, odds are Ken knows. So I think that really as questions may come up this morning regarding the operational functions, we've got Ken in the room. Don't hesitate if anybody does have those questions to rely on Ken, and he'll help provide additional answers as we go through our discussions. The second one is Stephanie Oliver. Stephanie has been with HARSB for 18 years. Started originally as a clerk. Now she's the office manager. Anything that deals with the administrative functions of the board, Stephanie is your go-to individual. Likewise, she will also be participating in kind of an overview of the history of the Hayden Area Regional Sewer Board, just for those who don't perhaps know how the board started originally and where it came from. Stephanie's going to give us an overview of that piece. And as discussions continue this morning, if you have questions about the administrative side of the board or the finances of the board, you can lean on Stephanie, and if she knows the answer off the top of your head, she'll shout it out. You would be surprised at how many answers she does know off the top of her head. So without further ado, I guess maybe we'll start first, Stephanie, with you and a history of the Hayden Area Regional Sewer Board.
Okay.
Green.
No,
Let's do it. Yeah, that's good.
You're good.
Good.
As long as I'm red?
Yes.
Okay. Back in May of 1983, HARSB had the second follow-up meeting of the Sewer Coordination Conference. So HARSB wasn't even in existence then. In April of 1984, they had another setup meeting for the Hayden Area Regional Sewer Advisory Board, in which Kootenai County acted as the lead agency in the construction, and PAC was the liaison with the state and county for regarding fiscal matters. In November of 1984, we were established as the Hayden Area Regional Sewer Advisory Board for Phase 1 interim drain field and the Phase 2 mechanical treatment facility, but we were not established as a separate legal entity at that time. In 1984, the Honeysuckle Regional Interceptor was put in with 3 lift stations and the community drain field. The Hayden Area Regional Sewer Board was created actually in October of 1986 between the City of Hayden and the Hayden Lake Recreational Water and Sewer District at that time, with the airport being a customer. In 1987, the Regional Wastewater Treatment Plant originally was built. In June of 1990, the First Amendment to the GPA was written, and Kootenai County became a member of HARSB again. Well, of the new HARSB. Became a member of the new HARSB. From there, we then had put in an outfall to the Spokane River, so we no longer had to use the drain field, and that was in 1992. In 1993, 400 acres and 476 acres were purchased 3 miles north of the treatment plant, and they were purchased for the land application site. In 1995, a pressure effluent line and a 9 million gallon lagoon were constructed to accommodate the storage for irrigation use at the land app site. We also at that time put in dewatering, storage, and maintenance facilities. In 1995, we also got our belt filter press, and we ended up with a new center pivot for the the land app site. In 1996, we went ahead and we had an upgrade to the treatment plant to 1.3 MGD with a second oxidation ditch and another clarifier. In 1998, HARSB finally had their own administration building out at the treatment plant site, which was actually happened to be a small trailer. And then in 2001, we put the 18-inch main line in Atlas and honeysuckle to the plant. We also did from 2001 and 2000 to 2005, we did the full second interceptor line. In 2005, Blue Water Technologies came out to the facility, and we had a research facility at the site, which now is your CIP building with this new construction. In 2006, we did a short main extension into the plant. In 2006, we also bought 10 additional acres on the west side of the plant, which gave us a total of 20 acres. In 2008, we put on a new oxidation ditch and the fourth clarifier. In 2011, we put a south pivot irrigation system in. And in 2012, we purchased 31.5 acres. In 2012, we also started the conversation because we had an MPDS permit for the TMDL on the dissolved oxygen for the Spokane River, and we had a 10-year compliance plan we had to meet, which is where all the current construction has been since 2013, was on that regulatory upgrade. During that regulatory upgrade, we had the entity construction agreement. We had the B&R part of the facility that was built between 2013 and 2016. We ended up with 10 more acres from the city of Hayden in 2014 to manage the new B&R facility. In 2015, we ended up with a second agreement to the JPA, which basically really updated a lot of the old language and made the JPA current to what we were actually functioning. And then in 2019, we had a third amendment to the JPA, which allowed the entities to be able to transfer wastewater units if the board got so low that an entity needed wastewater units and the board did not have any. And then in 2019, the Celtice Way line to Hutter was put in. It's dry at this time, but it was done for the second outfall. And then in 2020, we had the fourth amendment to the JPA, which changed the definition of a wastewater unit. That's kind of HARSB in a nutshell.
Any questions for Stephanie? Okay, hearing none. Ken, do you want to bring us through an overview of the operational functions of the sewer board and the plant?
Yes. Good morning, everyone. Ben asked me to go through what we actually do at the facility and go over some terms that we use to make sure we're all on the same page about what's happening. So I'm going to start with my clean water story. Every day, homes and businesses within our collection systems, between the county, the district, and the airport, they discharge pollution to HARSB. And it's HARSB's responsibility to turn that pollution into clean water and biosolids. At the plant, we remove the innards, the sand. We also remove the trash that should go in the trash can but ends up at the plant. That leaves an organic soup, which we grow bacteria, specific bacteria to consume all those organics, grow more bugs, and create clean water and biosolids. The clean water, the bacteria and clean water separate. The clean water is disinfected for reuse and irrigation, and reuse includes dumping it into the Spokane River, because in the Spokane River it's used for recreation, the fish swim in it. We all know that the Spokane River has losing reaches, and some of our water actually enters the aquifer, and someone in Washington is probably drinking it. Okay, and also irrigation out at the farm. The bacteria, biosolids, and biosolids is a great product for supporting agriculture. So HARSB is responsible for the treatment equipment and the O&M staff to meet the discharge requirements from the facility. So we take the pollution, we remove the pollution, create clean water and biosolids, and both the water and the solids have requirements that we have to meet. HARSB assigns wastewater service connections to homes and businesses. Originally, it was based upon equivalent residential, or ERs. This is an engineering term typical in wastewater, but it refers to basically what a home will contribute to the sewer system. For many years, it was 200 gallons a day times 30 days, or about 6,000 gallons a month. But it was only flow-based. That's what our ER was. Well, in 2018, with the new JPA, we decided to add a new term, and that was wastewater unit. And we went to wastewater units because some of our users were only giving us 3,000 gallons a month, and they were paying for 6,000. And there were others that were doing 8,000 gallons a month and having to pay for 12,000 gallons a month. So by going to 1,000 gallons unit for a wastewater unit, we had the chance to incrementally increase the service connections to the user and have it be reasonably close to what they were actually providing us. The other thing we did in 2018 is we added solids, organics, ammonia, and phosphorus, or what we call load, to the treatment plant. So, and the reason why we added that is because the non-domestic users have potential for sending us stuff that's above what a typical home would send to the treatment plant. Well, the treatment plant still has to remove it. So the goal is that if you give us more of this stuff, you have to have more service connections so that you pay for that extra treatment. That's what the load factor was that we did in about 2018 with the new JPA. So when a home or business pays for a wastewater unit, they are paying to receive wastewater services. That's to take their pollution and turn it into clean water and biosolids. They are not buying a cubic centimeter of the concrete wall in the B&R tanks or the oxidation ditches or part of a bearing in the return activated sludge pumps. You are paying for the wastewater services that HARSB is providing. HARSB uses the wastewater service fee to pay for equipment needed to clean the wastewater to meet the discharge requirements for both water and biosolids. HARSB's sole responsibility is to have the equipment, the O&M staff needed to meet the IPDES permit for the Spokane River discharge and the IDEQ permit for water reuse out at the farm. That's our sole responsibility. This is pretty simple. Wastewater is expensive. I don't care if you want to clean water, it is just expensive. The operation and maintenance or O&M costs are distributed to the three entities based upon the number of the billable wastewater units. So if your entity has units in its or service connections in its inventory that people aren't connected, they're not paying for the O&M services. Only the people who get sewer bills are paying for the operations and maintenance of the facility. Each year, the excess O&M payments are returned to the entity. So we're a zero-based budget. Okay? We do that because HARSB does not have the means to generate income. The income comes from the entities. Mayor McIntyre was very insistent that we not run out of money in August and September when you all have spent your money and may not have any left over to give us. So we always made sure, and we've continued the practice, that we have enough money in the budget so that we can do what we need to do to meet our requirements, but when we're done at the end of the year, you all get any excess O&M fees back. Now that's operations and maintenance fees based upon the billable connections. Each year, the entities pay only for the actual O&M costs of the facility. When you flush, think of us. I'm done.
Perfect. Thanks, Ken. Any questions for Ken on operation or administrative functions on his end?
Just a point of clarification.
wastewater, both collection and treatment. Kent is in charge of the treatment side and the collection side for the city of Hayden.
Yes.
Whereas the Hayden Lake Sewer District is in charge of the collection system for the district. And so with and we generate our revenue to be able to operate and maintain that collection system and make improvements and do whatever needs to be done. So part of the revenue that we take in has to go to our collection system, whereas all the revenue from Hayden goes to HARSB.
One minor clarification is I am only the responsible charge operator for the city's collection system. The city owns its own collection system. HARSB does not own it. Okay.
That would clarify that as well. So we collect enough.
We do collect enough to maintain our own system, and we made a decision a couple years ago to start to have our own employees for our collection system. So we did hire an individual who happened to recently be called up, and so is with the Guard, but we have 2 positions that are approved for our collection system. So our plan was to evolve to that, and so a portion of what the people pay us comes in for us to maintain our lift stations and our collection system, and then a portion is used to pay HARSB for the services they provide on our collection system. And maybe one additional is the force main. When we think of collection, there's also the force main piece. The HARSB board some years ago approved that, or clarified, reiterated that the force mains were HARSB's responsibility. So that is the line that goes from the main lift stations back to the plant.
And for the record purposes, that was Brett Boyer with the city.
Barb Neal with the Sewer District. You said that the OMN is only billed to active users. Is that the case with the wastewater service fees?
No, wastewater service fees are cap fees.
Oh,
they go into
okay.
the equipment into the facility so that we can provide the wastewater services.
Okay, so that's a one-time service fee?
One
Okay.
time. When you connect, you get an allocation of wastewater services from HARSB.
Okay. Thank you.
While we're on it, with more point of clarification.
We might talk about where we are with the ERs and WUs as far as a total. This is kind of the map that we talk about every day, and trying to keep a supply and how we maybe do that.
And for clarification of the record, that was Ed Short.
Sorry, I'll clarify next time.
Steph, you got those? I don't have my report. Today we have about 1,194, as I recall. As I recall, for the March report, the equivalent residents, or ERs, or 6 wastewater units, were at 1,194. Yes, yeah, my memory's not that bad. That are available for other people to get wastewater services.
Currently at this time, for allocation purposes, the city has approximately 77%, and the district has approximately 22% of there's fractions in there, so they're
More nuanced, guys. So we don't use a whole lot of new ones because we pre-sold ours. The city is the one that sells as it goes. And Brett, can you estimate annually where you're kind of at as far as eating up ERs?
I would say, for example, last year we were way down, and we did about 60. So we were at probably around maybe 100 ERs last year, and prior to that we were probably 200. Maybe that range, just give you a broad range because we're up and down, but our I look at the residential units last year, we built only about 60, so that's 60 ERs plus there's commercial that you would add to that.
final clarification. Steph, can you tell us, in the 90s, what the percentage was and kind of highlight the decline or the exchange in ownership as we move forward?
When we started HARSB back in sorry. When we started back in the 1983, 1984s, the district was in the 70+%, and the city was the one that was in the 20+%, with the airport being about 1%. Back in about 1995, it was about 50-50. And then from there, the city has slowly started gaining more percentage on the allocated billable yards.
Here's your tax bag seal, right?
Yes, hi, this is Matt Roeder. Maybe it would be important to identify why the county was brought back into the joint powers agreement.
Okay. There was very much contention between the entities, and it was a serious enough contention that a moderator and mediator was brought into the board. And instead of being able to resolve, they brought the county back in to act as a tiebreaker. Is the best probably way to put it. When the advisory board was originally set up in '84, each entity had one vote. When the JPA in 1986 was done, each entity had one vote. In 1990, when the county came back in, each entity had one vote. And that has proceeded all the way through our history, where the people part of the JPA, each entity has one vote, regardless of how many allocations or billable yards they have.
Again, this is Matt Roeder with the City of Hayden. The reason why I even asked that question is because it's a very complex agreement that when you make a decision, it's very bureaucratic, I guess is the best way to put it. It takes a lot of effort and time because we have different interests. And the reason why I'm supportive of what we're talking about is that this would simplify for everybody the possibility of running the sewer plant from a governmental standpoint.
Any other questions from the group?
Barb Neal, Hayden Lake Sewer District. I continue to have an issue with us not having a voice at the table. So that is crucial to our district. Enough said.
Any final questions, and we'll keep them just related to operations of the board or the administrative functions at this juncture? All right, hearing none, I will move on to our next item on the agenda, which is going to be D2. And D2 really is just an opportunity for anybody to vet out any understanding of some of the terminology that is commonly used when discussing the sewer board or the plant itself. Ken and I had an opportunity to chat along with Steph yesterday about some of the facets of wastewater treatment that we have to be mindful of that maybe a layperson isn't aware of. Ken, some of those definitions I know you touched on already in your presentation, such as a definition of what a wastewater unit is, but do you maybe want to speak a little further with the group regarding some definitions or common terminology that is helpful to understand for purposes of discussion? Differences between flows and loads, which I know you at least touched on. Obligations regarding metals and specifically what may be required of the board moving forward under the new IPDS permit, etc.
We are in the process of, our current permit has been administratively extended. It ended in 2019. We are anticipating a new permit this year. Included in that permit will be some information or some requirements with respect to metals. And the metals are coming up because the Spokane River has metals limitations. We do not know in the future, and it has large to do with what's coming out of Lake Coeur d'Alene, which is coming down the Coeur d'Alene River from the Silver Valley. But you should know that story. So down the road, in addition to loads and flows, we may be putting metals limits on users, because if you give me metals at the treatment facilities, we are not a metals removal facility. Metals removal requires different technology, and while yes, the bugs may absorb some of it, it's really not designed to take metals. So in the future, there may be additional requirements to remove metals and other things. And that's forever compounds, PFAS, PCBs. So these are things that'll, which we could see on the horizon. What else?
And for purposes of discussion moving forward, if the HARSB entity remains intact, there may be obligations for identifying really a plan of action for how to address these things collectively as a group. And to Matt's point, in a bureaucratic setting, if HARSB is ultimately dissolved, then there's at least an argument that can be made that it might simplify the process, and that really it might be easier for the entity who's managing the operations of the facility to simply adapt and adjust to those changes and requirements. Is that correct?
Yeah, the real stumbling block is we are a state agency, but we have no taxing authority. So by one agency taking us over that has that ability, it would simplify the process to get funding from the state revolving fund to do any type of upgrades that are required because of new permit conditions. That would be a reason for the SRF fund to make money available to the entity that took us over to implement the new equipment and technology needed to meet the requirements. Is that good?
That is. Questions?
Just a point of clarification. The district and the city are taxing entities, but we don't rely on any taxes because it's an enterprise fund for water and wastewater. So that's in my, the city of Hayden could raise their ad valorem tax and transfer it over to the treatment plant, but I don't think I've ever seen a city in Idaho that's done that.
So I think that what Ken is meaning is that there's differences in your abilities to finance.
True.
You have different authority to finance, you've utilized different methodologies to finance, and obviously there's a lot of complexities to using multiple financing mechanisms to finance a single project. I mean, we saw that, and we're continuing to see that in a 10-year project to get the current upgrade done. So we would essentially, if things remain the way they are, we'd essentially start that process over on this upgrade that Ken required. And it was a very arduous and complex and difficult process with 3 different entities with 3 different methodologies for how they were going to pay for it. So it's not really about the taxing authority.
Right. I just want, this is an enterprise fund for all of us, not an ad valorem property tax fund.
Remember, I'm just a simple old wastewater operator.
That's not true, Ken.
Danielle, this is Fonda Jovic, legal counsel for the city of Hayden. Are there funding opportunities, either state or federal, that are unavailable to HARSB because HARSB is a joint powers entity and not a taxing district?
That is correct. The state revolving fund is not available to HARSB.
Thank you.
We had to rely on the city, and we had to rely on the district with their LID to go to solicit an SRF fund from IDEQ They gave us the money, we did the work, HARSB did the work.
And so if I'm hearing you correctly, that's what is playing into the complexities of finding funding in order to do what needs to be done at the wastewater treatment facility.
I don't know that I would say that it's necessarily that HARSB wouldn't be able to get an SRF loan. The issue is really, how do you get authority to finance?
Right.
And HARSB has no authority to finance because it is made up of entities with different powers. And you only have the power that all entities have when you have a joint powers entity. So if it was 2 districts, it would actually be a lot simpler. We could do an LID across both districts, but because they're not both water sewer districts, you can't do that. So essentially, HARSB has no authority to borrow money because it's prohibited by the Constitution,
right.
Article 8, Section 3. So that's why the entities have to do the financing and bring the money to HARSB.
Right.
So that's the stumbling block, no authority to incur debt.
And my follow-up to that question beyond financing is, I'm thinking more towards grants or other funding that would be designated by the state. Is it unavailable to HARSB because it's not a taxing district?
I don't know.
Okay.
Like the ARPA funds
Yes.
that came through. I would say that the thing with the ARPA funds is that they almost all had a match. Like nobody was financed 100% with ARPA funds. So to take advantage of something like that, you have to have authority to borrow. HARSB doesn't have that.
Thank you. That was the clarification I was looking for.
So I have a question. So after phase 2 is through, we've talked about going on to phase 3 to meet new requirements. So is that something that you're saying that you could raise money from the state if it was one entity that would pay for it and we wouldn't have to go to our users for an LID?
Not necessarily. I mean, we've been in a unique position lately because there has been some money that came from the federal government down, and wastewater was one of the projects that it was focused on. They focused it on lower income cities and districts anyway, so that I don't know that it would have been available to Hayden and HARSB anyway. It's really no. So the money's not going to fall out of the sky because of this project. It's going to be how the authority to incur the debt happens, and it's much simpler if one entity can get the authority rather than us having to go around and deal with all these different methodologies and then bring money with different requirements, because an LID has very different requirements for how it's expended than a revenue bond, which is what was used by the city of Hayden. So we had to match all of that up and match up your percentage participation and match up the timing for the different types of financings into this one, giant spreadsheet that's given Stephanie nightmares for 10 years.
Right. So what happens to our percentage participation if it goes to just one entity?
It would be owned by that entity, and they would do the financing in whole, and then you would pay for, you as a customer would pay for that as part of your O&M fees. On a going forward basis. On a going backward basis, we did examine whether or not what would happen to the district's LID, and there's no real way for the city to take that out. So that would continue to be an obligation of the property owners within the district, and that would have to be taken into consideration with the structure of it being brought under the Hayden's umbrella.
This is Matt Roeder again, City of Hayden. And this question is directed towards the district, and hopefully I can articulate my question. We know that our ERs, based on the March report, was 1,190, and that's residential hookups. We have Hayden Canyon that will take in 1,500 eventually hookups, which means, and there's other developments that are planned for Hayden. At some point, the HARSB will have to increase its capacity. Now, I know from a regulatory standpoint, we're under an obligation, we have to meet those requirements or we get fined. But the question to the district is, are you willing to pay for, and do you have an obligation to pay for upgrades to increase the capacity of the plant? Do you want to do that? That's a question for the district.
It's obviously more nuanced than that, but This is the overarching problem here is the math, right? That every time we contribute to a bond, we do it on a percentage basis, and our percentage basis clearly going down. It's since the 1990s. We've been on the wrong side of this math, if you want to consider it. And there's cap fees. There's other issues involved when it comes to expansion. Generally, that's the greatest motivator here, is that we need to find a better system where we're not caught in this declining ownership percentage, locked into a 75%, 25%, 20%. Find the way to do an LID to make the contribution, and then next time around, it's a lower percentage. We've contributed to the higher percentage that we never capture any value for, and so the math from the district standpoint is bad. Every time we have to have this conversation, we're making a contribution to a benefit we'll never take advantage of or never capitalize on. And so obviously, Matt, you know as well as I do, that's the motivation in part behind this discussion. How do we deal with two entities that are in two different growth patterns? And it goes back to history. We pre-sold all of our ERs to help finance this operation. So we see very, very little growth. We don't have a Hayden Canyon, and we never will. And so as you expand, not only in Hayden Canyon, but as you expand west, you'll continue to alter that ownership in a way that doesn't work for us in the long term, and it really creates a burden on us that it's difficult to manage for the foreseeable future.
Let me just add something to that. The ongoing project is both regulatory, improving the capacity, not improving the capacity, but improving the ability of the treatment plant to meet the permits. Then there's the expansion aspect of it, and the expansion aspect should go. This is just my opinion, should go to those people who are going to use it. If the district isn't going to use any more, we already have paid for a certain amount of expansion and a certain amount of capacity already. And for us to say, let's fund more capacity so the city of Hayden can grow, I'm absolutely opposed to that.
It's not because we don't love the city of Hayden, it's because the math's just not on our side. Our constituents will never take advantage of that capacity.
And I think from our perspective, and Jim, you're right, in this last project, we can see there's a little bit of a model how that could work, in that project was divided up into regulatory and expansion portions and replacement. There were three different parts of that, and so a model for moving forward would be on future projects, whether it's for expansion or for some regulatory thing that comes down the line, that in an agreement we can put that is divided off so that the expansion part is not to be borne by everyone, that it's borne by those that would benefit from the expansion. And so I think that can be done, and there's some language like that in the agreement between Post Falls and Rathdrum, that consideration, because they each have different obligations. It's not exact, but I think there's a model where that could work to perhaps relieve the concern that you're not paying for expansion if that's not what you want. If something regulatory comes up, then that would be something that would be shared equally across all those that are paying the fee.
So I would say this to you guys, the county was brought in the 1990s because there was acrimony between the groups. We don't see that today. We're all just trying to administer this just joint asset as fairly and effectively as can. And the city and the district, we get along very, very well. And we talk about these things all the time. And if this overarching grand thing that we're proposing here doesn't happen, at least maybe we can address in the JPA some of these more serious elements that probably need to be reevaluated from an agreement that was 40 years old. So the dialogue is important to us. Even if we don't get to the end zone right away, at least maybe we can address some of these things where the two entities just are in different positions, and that's not going to change anytime soon. So we appreciate everybody being here. This dialogue is super important to us regardless of the outcome.
Can I ask a question? I guess maybe I'm missing information, but why do you think the district has been paying for expansion? Because it hasn't.
Yeah, I'm not saying that, but we're paying for our ownership at the time we do an LID, which,
But we actually adjusted that in the financing agreement so that the city's percentage grew over this project span. So I don't think you are paying for expansion. So I think, am I missing something?
I'm not gonna tell Danielle she's missing something, but a year from now, whatever number we're locked into, Danielle, when we take the snapshot, even if we allow for a decline in ownership, our ownership continues to decline in perpetuity. So we're never gonna recapture the point at which we made the contribution, because 10 years from now, we'll be in the teens. And so if we make a contribution at 25%.
But we're adjusted, but we've accounted for that in the financing agreement.
Yeah,
So
but-
it's being adjusted
To
down.
a point.
Yeah, exactly.
To a point. So treatment plant's designed for 2.1 or 2.0, 2.4, whatever the number is. And yes, the hardware and concrete and pipes and everything was paid for to get that expansion primarily by the city of Hayden. However, because we pay for operation and maintenance, all that excess capacity, Ken still has to operate it. You can't just, you can't turn it off, on and off as an extra 100 gallons comes in the door. So there's a carrying cost for that capacity that the district pays for that, based on today's numbers, that aren't going to be used in the future.
I
And
don't
so
know how that works from an O&M perspective. Is that allocable just between the three entities?
it's part of the funded depreciation. It's built, it's being depreciated. We're funding that depreciation. We're up to $1.5 million a year on the fundable depreciation now in the whole HARSB system. Our share of that is today 22%. 4 years ago it was 26%. Or 10 years ago was 26%. So we've continually paid for a higher level of that funded depreciation that then goes back into the system. So yes, we're not doing it, when the capital costs are spent, but we're doing it as part of the carrying cost for that capital cost.
Is that accurate?
Yeah, on an average daily basis, we have excess capacity at the plant. But we have had situations where all three entities have exceeded their allocation of wastewater services. So that I can't, if the water shows up at the front door, I've got to have space to put it. And yes, there are many, many days that we don't have that excess water, and so it's just sitting there, and we have depreciation on that. We have some maintenance, I'm not sure how much there is, but that capacity needs to be there because you all send me water in excess of what you have allocation for.
And I'm not arguing that capacity has to be there, Ken. I'm just saying that in the past, we've paid more for that operation maintenance capacity than we're using today. So it's a sunk cost.
But isn't that paid on us? Aren't you paying only 22% right now? So you're paying 22% plus whatever excess has to be available. So that's just your piece.
No, that's not how it works. We pay 22% of the total bill, operation maintenance.
Right, but I guess I'm saying that seems reasonable because everybody has to have. There has to be excess there for everyone. So 77% of the excess is paid for by Hayden, and 22% is paid for by you, and 1% by the county.
And in theory, that excess capacity is recapitalized when somebody buys into the system. So that's why we pay capitalization fees.
But then your percentage would go down.
Huh?
Then your percentage goes down, and your percentage of O&M goes down.
I'm just talking about the past situation, not.
But if you're always paying what your percentage allocation is on O&M, then you're not overpaying.
But the percentage allocation is based on how much flow comes through the door.
Is that true, or is it
Or the
based on
number of works,
ownership
the number of
percentage?
works, or whatever we're calling it today.
Right, so if your allocation for 2022 is 22%, that's fair. And then if in 2023 it's 21%, that's fair. I think you're thinking of what right.
For that year, but I'm just talking about, there's a there's a, you know, when I do rate studies, I have to look at what, you know, funded depreciation, all the other stuff that goes in, and then it's allocated to the new users and the past users, because it costs money. You know, yes, it has to be there, Ken, but it still costs money to be there.
But that shouldn't be allocated to Hayden when it's based on, when you're paying based on your percentage. That's what I'm not understanding.
Well,
The problem is it's not static, right? If it was static, it wouldn't matter so much. But when there's a clear ownership, that's the only way to capture it today. That's the only fair way to do it. That we're not arguing that. We're not even arguing. We're just seeking clarification. But when you have a clear decline and a clear, basically this curve that's working against one entity, it's worth kind of reevaluating how we're set up, because if we're static, we're at 50-50 or 75-25. That doesn't matter. It'd seem more equitable in the long run to the constituent.
But as long as your participation is declining, your cost is declining with your participation, I guess I don't see what the issue is.
It's actually going up.
Yeah, no, our costs go up even as our percentages go down, because.
Well, everybody's cost
Yeah,
is
because
going up.
treating water is expensive.
Right, but as long as your percentage of the cost allocable to the district declines with your percentage of utilization, that seems fair to me. I guess that's what I'm confused about.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Are you referring to your investment into the sewer system?
Yes.
Versus your use of the sewer system?
Exactly.
You know, and I understand what you're trying to say is that we paid for 30%, for example, of the infrastructure. And as time goes down, you're getting less and less percent. So you feel like because you made that investment into it, you're actually losing out. Because you paid 30% one year, but now it's your annual expenses are being calculated at a lower percentage rate.
Commissioner, you said it a lot better than I did.
And so I would almost separate the two out, because you've got capital investment and then you've got the cost of running it. And you have to look at, what is the cost to run it, and then how much are you paying for what you're using, versus a capital investment, which maybe needs to be looked at as some sort of a purchase agreement that gives you a credit or something like that, if they're taking over the capital component.
So that's the one thing we would have to do. If we got to that point, we'd have to value that and give it some sort of a capitalization credit moving forward. I think you're exactly right if we get to that point, as far as how we value the asset.
It should be over, how long are you depreciating it for? 30, 50 years?
It all
20
depends
years?
on the equipment. Some is shorter, some is longer.
Yeah.
Concrete tanks are 50 years.
Okay, well, I would just pick a number that's reasonable and start putting your calculations together based upon that. At least you have something to look at. And people can start talking about that if you want to, go down that road. But I think that's what you're trying to get at, in essence, with this.
So that was, for the record purposes, that was Bruce
Commissioner Matari, sorry.
Remember, come on, Ed DePriest. Okay, now, I'm clueless, okay, for the most part to this discussion here. But my understanding is that what we're really initially looking at here is whether or not Hayden is going to take over administering as a whole. Am I correct in that? Okay, and what I'm hearing a lot of discussion about here are concerns to be determined in a contractual agreement, if that were to happen. Am I correct there? Okay, kind of just for a, straw vote, if you want to call it that, as I listen to this whole thing, and my understanding is that we're really here to discuss, is this something that we want to possibly move forward on? Hayden taking take ownership and management of the treatment plant facility. Can I ask you, just on that alone, where do you stand? What's your position? Do you consider that that Hayden managing it might be a good thing, and then we'll work out these contractual issues as part of the process, or are you somewhat opposed maybe to it happening?
Well, then, council member, maybe I've got to just jump in and we can circle back to answering that question, because it kind of feels like, looking at our agenda, we're getting into D4 without having first addressed D3. In summary fashion, I think that part of the big picture is this joint powers entity exists, the first and foremost question is, are the parties in a position to explore dissolution of that entity? And if they are, what is each side needing or requiring of the other in order to pursue that further? At the end of the day, we may reach a decision that the entities are not in a position to explore dissolution. And maybe the parties settle on not doing anything. Maybe they settle on amending the JPA again and discussing a different outcome for how things are allocated. Maybe we do move in the direction to dissolution. And so the big picture answer to your question is, today's discussion is kind of vetting out what those questions would be that need answered from both sides if we were going to entertain a dissolution of the JPA, which would in effect require one entity to take and assume ownership and control of the treatment facility moving forward.
Okay, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Just for a point of clarification also, I think Brett has danced around it, and now Councilman Dupree's question sort of gets there, and Ben, your explanation dances around it. For clarification of the record and anybody else who might listen to this at a later date, if there was an exploration of the city of Hayden taking over HARSB or dissolution of HARSB, essentially it's then a city owning a utility and having and serving outside of its boundaries. That would be the end result. That is not a foreign concept. It is done locally. Brett sort of mentioned it. You all may be aware the city of Post Falls owns its water treatment facility, and the city of Rathdrum is just a wholesale user of that service. The city of Sandpoint owns its water system and serves outside of its boundaries to other districts. So for the public that might listen to this, this is not a foreign concept. We would not be reinventing the wheel. There are other successful areas immediately around us, other successful municipalities where they own the utility and serve outside their boundaries very successfully.
Barb Neal, Hayden Lake Sewer District. I understand exactly what you're saying, and I do know that it's been done. My concern are the rates, because in those areas, we've seen rates go up for our users.
And that is absolutely a fair question. So in those other municipalities, what happens, and I think Jim sort of mentioned it a bit in his work, he does rate studies. There are professional third parties that evaluate and do rate studies to tell the municipalities what those rates should be and what the mathematical equation is based on, consistent with the law and both our governmental requirements as well as what we can charge outside of our municipal boundaries.
Yes, and I do understand that. I guess my concern would be that if we are charged a certain rate and we disagree with that rate, it escalates into a lawsuit. And
so the goal would be, of course, for that not to happen. There's a lot of work done behind the scenes before a resolution ever goes in front of a city council for a rate adoption. And there's a lot of cooperative work. I represent the city of Sandpoint, so I've worked with them on their most recent rate study. And there are points at which maybe there's a disagreement, and the goal always is, with the use of the third-party professional, that we work through it so both boards take a decision point. Both boards come with a decision point that they can agree with. We don't want a lawsuit either. Nobody does.
I would say it's not completely unique what we're contemplating here, but we're not a new customer. Obviously, it's a matter of how do we massage the fact that we were here at the beginning. We had an ownership interest. We still have an ownership interest. How do you account for that ownership interest? We agree that a rate study is necessary to kind of protect our customer base and to further define basically our exposure to the cost. And I would say this: we all want to have this conversation. It's not being driven by the city. It's being driven by this notion that we all agree that maybe that there's a more efficient way to manage the system. And how do we have that dialogue?
That is a great point. So, and I think we have two separate conversations sort of paralleling. So one is, and Ben just hit on it, do we even want to engage in a conversation around dissolution and the city of Hayden taking over HARBS, and what would that look like? And that is in a purchase agreement and a dissolution agreement, which also, according to the JPA, would need judicial approval. So we are looking at engaging in a conversation that at the end of the day, we are all confident we can take a stipulated judicial determination in front of a judge and say, this is the order that we want you to sign, Judge. We followed the law, we followed the terms and conditions of our JPA for termination and dissolution. So step one is, if we want to explore that, do we go that route? And then all of you should know that gets judicial blessing. So that covers all of us, right? Second to that is, if that happens and occurs, then that's the dissolution piece, which accomplishes your concerns regarding your current investment. Wholly second to that is a rate study. Now that you are if that happens, when you become a wholesale user, then the rate study goes from that point forward to say these are the rates that will apply. And you can do the rate study and the evaluation of your investment for dissolution purposes at the same time, so that you can make an informed decision about that dissolution process, so it's not a surprise after the fact. Like, you run those simultaneously so that you can say to your constituents, right? Like, if we do this, here's what the rate study says your rates will be at the end of the day, and here's how it's calculated. So we're talking about a process that allows for fully informed decision making. No dissolution by ambush.
And Fonda, I think that's a great place to pick back up in honor of Chairman Duncan's promise that we would take a brief break every 60 to 90 minutes. Maybe this is a good stopping point for a moment, and when we come back, we will pick back up at D3 with the City of Hayden kind of having the floor. So, 10-minute break. Thank you. Zooming the special meeting of various public entities. On our posted agenda, we are going to resume with item D3 at this juncture. Just 2 points of reminder. First, I do want to commend all the participants for everyone's interactions. I think that ultimately the clerks behind me are very appreciative of a good, clean record, and I think that giving individuals the opportunity to speak, not talking over each other, etc., helps aid them in that endeavor. So my thanks to the group for doing a great job so far. Part 2 is just a reminder, if you could please remember to state your name prior to speaking. It also helps with any transcriptions that may ever be necessary in the future. So with that said, I will turn the floor over to the City of Hayden to really begin the discussion of D3.
The mayor's asked me to put this together, and to accumulate some of the thoughts and thinking that I've heard from the council members and things we've been talking about. I thought we'd just put something in writing so you would have it now or after this meeting. Just some general information about the city. Hopefully, I passed around a copy for all of you. By the way, Rep. Boyer, the city administrator. So in this discussion here, we were throwing out, what actions and what framework we would like to see and study. It's still deciding whether or not the city also should do this. I mean, we also have some concerns. There are liabilities and issues associated with this. I think ultimately the ones that we've talked about, we think it's a good idea to pursue and look at and answer questions and try to address your concerns. And so just going through these, the idea would be that the city would take on ownership and management of the treatment plant. All the HARSB employees would become employees of the city, basically continuing to operate just as they are right now, become a division of the city. The district and county would become customers of the city with specific agreements in place. And again, I referenced the Post Falls Rathdrum. There are other examples. I read through that one again. I think there are some things in place there to maybe address. I've already heard some of your concerns to try to address further concerns you might have. The city would operate its own collection system. We assume the district would keep and operate its own collection system. We need to decide what to do with the airport infrastructure. And then today and going forward, if this continues, is to listen and understand all the entity concerns. And we wanted to convey that the city sees this as a responsibility and there would be legal ramifications to the city taking this on, which we can't say today, but we would like to look at this, that we're not looking at this as a money-making type of thing. This is not something where we see this as something to generate, to put in to the general fund, or to see assets of this that we could turn in. These are assets of the sewer enterprise, and we see that as remaining so. That there's liabilities and assets associated with this endeavor. Looking at this, we'd like to remove some of the complexity and inefficiency in having 3 entities run the facilities while treating all parties fairly now and into the future. We think outline the issues, study the issues, and suggest hiring a consultant to help study the issues and meet as entities together to work through these issues over the next year, perhaps as a task force, subcommittee, however you want to set it up, and have folks meet on a regular basis to look at and address all these issues. Some reasons why that we put on here, again, to provide more efficiency of operations by doing away with having the 3 entities approving, meeting, deciding how to run and expand an operation. It would be overall less bureaucratic. The city is currently, I put 75%, I heard 77, up to 77% today, and it continues to increase that way. Reduces a layer of government. The city is the one that continues to grow, and it makes sense for the city in a fair manner to plan for that growth. And I addressed that earlier by saying when there are projects, and there is on the horizon already, we've got to look at, expanding the plant or adding the features to what's already there for expansion of the plant. Every time we do that, we have to get together and figure out how that's going to happen, and it's very complicated and difficult to do. If we can carve that off and not have three entities trying to do that, and not have three, maybe perhaps the other two entities paying for that, makes it much more simpler. I also on here, HARSB cannot borrow money. That's makes it difficult. Financing future projects would be much easier. And then there are some great examples in the state on how this could work. So just a rough outline of what we're thinking to perhaps move forward. That's I think we're at. Is there anything from Roger or Matt or anyone here that want to add anything?
Barb Neal, Hayden Lake Sewer District. HARSB currently owns almost 500 acres. And so my concern is that although you say that it's not an opportunity to gain an asset per se, what happens if we dissolve the JPA, we step back, we become customers, and you sell off land that we had an investment in over all these years?
We could address that, Barb. We would make it part of the enterprise fund and make it off limits to whoever becomes the owner to do anything to dispose of it anyway. That could be a contingency of any agreement we reach.
Yeah, I think we could address it that way. I think right now, we had this discussion yesterday in the meeting that we need to keep that for land application, and so it's there. If in the future, say technology changes, it's no longer needed, perhaps there's something in the agreement that talks about that those assets stay with, the treatment plant, and so that would reduce perhaps future regulatory costs or something like that. Those are things we could work through in an agreement, I think. And I think it's 540 acres if I estimate right on what's on.
It's a tough neighborhood, though. It's hard to sell land over there.
Are there any specific questions that the city would like to see the other entities be able to answer for the city to feel comfortable moving forward on your end?
Yeah, Brett Boyer. I think we wanted to hear, maybe part of the purpose here, and you were going to get to this, is to hear what your concerns are at this point, and we've heard some of them. We haven't heard really any in relation to the county and the airport. But are there any other concerns or things that, as we create a list of these are things we need to address, I haven't heard anything that can't be addressed by an agreement yet.
So maybe that brings us really to point 4 then, as kind of an opportunity to mesh these two together. And I don't know if maybe the county wants to start first, if the county has any comments of things that you would require on your end or like to see as part of answers for moving forward with dissolution if it were proposed.
Yeah, I think that our stake is so incredibly low that I really want to see the district and the city work things out. I think that the county will be taken care of in the process. So I don't really, have any concerns at this point. The challenge with the county is we have miles and miles of lines and very few users. So it is really high cost for the county customers, just because the infrastructure is so much and the users are so little. And there's going to be more expansion, at the airport for sure. But I'm not sure how long that will take, and so we'll just keep in the negotiations and the conversation. So I think we're going to be fine. Bruce, any thoughts?
The only thing is just I think we need to figure out a way to equitably calculate the investments, the values, just using basic, generally accepted accounting principles. I don't think it's that difficult, and if people can agree that the methodology was good to determine the values, then it's just a matter of working out the finer details so that the two parties can kind of, move forward. But I think it really just comes down to figuring that part out, which shouldn't be that hard.
Well, I want to be careful too that people understand that the infrastructure is there already. So it's not like anybody is going to get money back, because without the infrastructure, we don't get service. So we've paid for this infrastructure with joint powers to get the service. So I don't see it as being that, okay, Kootenai County has 6 miles of line in the ground. Now we're going to get a credit from the city for taking it over. We wouldn't get service if we didn't have the 6 miles of line in the ground. So I want to be very careful that we don't start conflating things, that there is some asset to be divided, which, that's probably too simplistic, but that is my understanding of the situation. If a brand new user came on board, like, the city of Shamrocks for today, and they came on board, they would have to provide the infrastructure. They'd have to pay for all the infrastructure to hook up to our operating plant. So it wouldn't be something that the city of Hayden would be responsible for doing. So I just want to, I don't know, I might have mucked something up, Ben, if you...
It's a valid point.
Okay.
No, I think what you're referring to is the hookups versus the infrastructure of the actual facility itself.
So the collection system and the actual sewer system, the sewer plant. So if those things don't exist, then people would have to pay for that stuff coming forward.
Yeah, I think it's just a matter of separating out what the asset is versus what the operating costs are. Because you're going to have to pay for the operating costs no matter what if you're a user of it.
Yes, but it's not a divorce. We're not dividing assets. So that's kind of what I'm trying to point out, is if you did it that way, okay, so we separate and each entity gets a credit, now we have to actually be charged back that same amount of money, because we wouldn't be able to obtain the service without the infrastructure, without the assets. So that's kind of what I'm trying to clarify, is there really isn't anything that somebody's going to get a credit for. We would have to go back and supply that. Just, the airport alone, if we were coming on board, or like the city of Shamrock, we'd have to be providing all that infrastructure, and then on the plant side would be the hookup fees, in addition to the actual infrastructure that comes to the plant.
I think that's where I was getting contrary to both of you on my understanding, because nobody's going to be losing their ability to connect to the system, right? Even though the ownership for legal purposes would transfer to the city of Harrison, you still get the benefit of those facilities, so you're not really losing your asset. You're transferring the management and ownership of the asset, but you still have the right to connect. Okay. And if you ask City of Hayden to buy out the county's interest in your asset, they don't have any money to do that, because all they collect is O&M. So you know what they do? They jack up everybody's O&M. So there's no money to buy it, because it's not like they're buying a home and they're getting the benefit of it. You're still sleeping in one of the bedrooms, so that's where I'm having a struggle with this discussion of what's the value of the depreciation.
Yeah, and I think part of it is just because everyone has different investment amounts. And so, you're doing an offset, but you're addressing those investments. If I'm hearing correctly from the cities, that over time they made certain amounts of investments. And so they kind of feel like they're just losing that in essence.
Yeah, but they're not.
Well, and I think the idea would be on a going forward basis, there's a way, maybe that's why having the city do the upgrades makes more sense. And then, but But you can't do that on a looking backward basis because there's no money to pay for it. So there's no money to like give a big windfall to the district when the project transfers.
Jim Coleman, I'm the one that broached this subject, so I should probably clarify what I was talking about. I'm not necessarily talking about the assets going backwards as much as the assets going forward. If the city of Hayden owns it, then and a major upgrade is required, they do the upgrade, and then that's the cost of that upgrade is reflected in the wholesale rate that the district pays to the because you got to pay for the capital costs and the O&M costs, because otherwise the plant doesn't operate. So it's really just it's a cost of service analysis going forward, which is what does it cost to treat a gallon of water, a pound of BOD, a pound of suspended solids, how many nitrogen, so on and so forth. What does that cost, and what is the contribution from the customer? And because the district becomes a wholesale customer at that point, i.e. like Rafton is with Post Falls, it's a fairly easy calculation to come up with what is our share of that. And then, quite frankly, I think the past is the past, and as long as we can protect the ability that is from my perspective, as long as the district can protect the assets that we've already put in there. I mean, we've got, I don't know what, a couple of hundred connections that we've already paid for but aren't using. As long as we can protect those and use them if we need them without having to pay another connection fee, I think I'm fine. That's just my opinion. I don't know about the rest of the board.
Right.
Yeah.
And to add to that, Fonda Jovic, legal counsel for the city of Hayden, I also wanted to go back and address the land, because I've heard the land as a concern a couple of different times. Just for clarification, what happens in a process like this is that land becomes an asset of our sewer enterprise fund. Once it's an asset of the sewer enterprise fund, and Brett can kick me under the table if I get this wrong, but once it's an asset of the sewer enterprise fund, it cannot be used for general fund purposes. So for instance, if the city council decides they want to take 25 acres of that 500 and they want to use it for a baseball field, the general fund has to buy that 25 acres from the sewer enterprise fund at fair market value. So they don't get to move that land around at will. It stays as a sewer enterprise fund asset exclusively and has to be used for that. So I just wanted to clarify that. I think we mentioned enterprise fund in passing, but I wasn't sure if everybody understood how that worked.
Jim Coleman, that's absolutely correct, and if the city buys the 25 acres at fair market value, then that money comes into the enterprise fund, which can go and should go to reduce the O&M capitalization costs going forward.
Correct.
This is Commissioner Matari. I think Commissioner Brooks has a comment he wanted to make. Are you there, Bill?
Yeah, this is Bill Brooks. I am very impressed with the collaborative nature of the participants in today's conference, and I know everybody's interested in clean water, and there's no debate there, but it's how we divide the assets if this goes forward. And Leslie has been very heavily involved in HARSB since I came on 4 years ago, and we have a pretty good understanding of what's happening. But to any way the county can be helpful or facilitate what's going on, we'd like to do that. At least I would like to do that as one commissioner. But thank you for attending.
Thanks, Bill.
Other comments or questions between the entities? I guess maybe we're really moved into D4, and so maybe the microphone is more on the court of the district at this point to say, are there other things that you would need to see as part of an agreement for the district to feel comfortable moving forward toward a dissolution if it were to go that direction?
Well, I think Jim Coleman, board member, I think I kind of alluded to many of the issues that I think I have, and that's, you know, that, and I think that the separation of the operation and maintenance impacts and the capitalization impacts is actually paramount to us being able to approve agreement, and not that at the end of the day we just say, hey, you know, as long as we're protected for the ERs that we've already purchased and have been allocated as part of our capitalization, and you know, that's it. We don't have to buy them again. Then I think that may be the best we can hope for. You know, obviously I'm going to try to negotiate more for the district, but that's my bottom line. I guess that's my bottom line, is that we're not going to give you ERs that we've already paid for to sell somewhere else, and that's kind of where I'm at on the capitalization side. On the operation and maintenance side, there's a lot of companies out there that can do cost of service analysis and do it on a wholesale basis, and the district is large enough, and there's a point of delivery that makes it fairly easy to do a cost of service analysis on that. And yes, Ken, we may exceed our allocation over a period of time, but we can fix that by equalization or whatever the case may be, if it becomes cost effective. But I mean, on a cost of service analysis, we'll be able to monetize that on water, waste, on loads, and so on and so forth. So that's my short and sweet bottom line, so to speak.
This is Danielle Quaid. I would also just point out that because of the LID, you have to have those connections, because those connections are connected to properties that receive benefit in exchange for payment of the LID. So that will absolutely be part of the deal.
Yes.
So there's probably some more mercurial things we need to address too, like how do we make that transition from owner to customer? We need to kind of be able to explain that to the 2,000 customers we have right now, and ensure that they're being protected. There's things that uniquely matter to the district, like the lake. We'd maybe have to have some sort of a kind of a notion of how the city sees that. The protection of that's important to us. So there's some that aren't as concrete as Jim's engineering mind, but need to be addressed from a more probably emotional standpoint and historical standpoint that I think we can all get to. We just need to kind of make sure we're being taken care of.
Ed Scott Fursell from Hayden. Could you expand a bit on your concerns about protecting the lake in this agreement?
Again, I think that we have a unique system where we're much more topographical than you are. We surround the lake. Our pump stations are above the lake. The lake keepers it's a prize to the region, but also to us, and so that making sure that that your system doesn't ever take away from our ability to protect that lake or your program moving forward. It's a more ethereal thing, Scott, where we just want to know that the things that matter to the district and its constituents will matter as we become a customer and kind of lose this magical seat at the chair, at the table. It's not a great answer, Scott, but it's...
Well, I think it's important to understand that the Hayden Lake Sewer District was founded on that principle to care for the lake, to protect the lake.
So just for point of clarification for issues to address moving forward, if you were a wholesale user and had 100% control over everything related to your collection system, does that, in your mind, touch what the city would be doing as the utility provider?
I could answer that question. Jim Coleman, or I can give you my answer to that question. Yes, to a certain extent. I mean, in an example, in protecting the lake, if someday, say the north end of the lake says, you know, we need sewer service, we want to, you know, there's a 3,000 acre development that's going in, we need to extend service up to the lake, they're in our district. You know, we have to have the ability to come to the city of Hayden and say, we're adding 3,000 users. I mean, that's a grandiose idea. There's no way the county's going to approve a 3,000 acre development. But anyway, that's kind of what we're looking at, is that we have a district that encompasses the entire lake, and someday, eventually, maybe the service is extended to those people who do in fact pay a little bit of tax to our district for administering that district. But you know, we need some assurances that we can in fact extend it if there's and buy that capacity, if we've already used up what we've already bought, and buy that capacity from the city of Hayden, much like the city of Rathdrum has been doing with the city of Post Falls.
That helps. Thanks for the clarification.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is Ken, the administrator. There is an issue if the city takes over the HARSB employees, that the benefits the HARSB employee receive is significantly higher in some instances than the city. We've already heard comments from some of the staff members that if the city takes over, they would leave. And while people are replaceable, what isn't replaceable is institutional knowledge. And what the staff knows about the plant and the city system is you can't replace that. It takes a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of money. So that needs to be on the list of things that need to be considered, is keeping the staff whole so that you can maintain the quality of service that we have maintained so far.
Ken, this is Scott Purcell from the City of Hayden. Brett and I have spoken at length about protecting the employees that are currently in the sewer district. I can assure you that we are well aware of the expertise that the sewer district has. We want to keep those employees. We understand that there are some differences between the way the city operates and the way the sewer district operates as far as human resources. But we are committed to pulling those together and making the employees, or assuring the employees, that we understand their pay structure and that we want them to remain working for the city in the event that we take this over.
And in addition to that, Fonda Jovic, legal counsel for the city of Hayden, and Ben can pipe in here as well, I would remind the board that while you are negotiating your individual interests related to the district, the county, and the city, you as a board have an obligation as the employer to those employees to maintain a unified front in the approach with regards to the employees. So from an employment perspective, you have a unified obligation to the employees as you work through this, while you have a separate obligation to each of your entities with your eye towards protecting your individual interests as entities. So don't lose sight of that second obligation.
I might just add to maybe what the mayor said. Again, Brett Boyer, we are sensitive to that issue, and have talked. I've talked with our HR person. We haven't resolved anything. Our benefits, at least like our medical benefits, I mean, it is slightly better. Our new one, you guys haven't seen. I know you guys have you know, a lower deductible, but actually our new benefit is actually fairly close to what you have. I realize the pay structure is different. There are things we can do to maybe carve out and or perhaps, you know, draw some lines and do some things. But you have a great team, and there's, you know, from our perspective as we talk, we want to be very sensitive to that and make sure that that is taken care of in a very good professional manner. So it'd be part of the discussion. So at this point, I don't think it's something we want the employees to you know, to stress about or worry about. And Ken, if you want to talk about it further with us, we can do that. So.
Next on our agenda is an opportunity for each of the entities to break out individually, chat amongst yourself, and then bring back to the group any final questions, comments, or concerns that you would like to leave the other entities with before we depart here today. I really want to defer to the entities on whether or not you feel like that would be beneficial and you still want to explore that option of breaking out for a few moments before coming back together. So I'll start with City of Hayden. You guys still want that opportunity? Okay. Well, all I needed was one. So we will move forward with that. So we are now on agenda item F, our various breakout sessions for the City of Hayden, room 1A.
Just 15, 20 minutes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
You got it. Well, I'll check in with each of the groups after 15, and if you're still going, I'll let the other groups know. The sewer district, you're going to be in 1B, and Kootenai County, you're going to move over to room number 2. So,
Bill, we'll go ahead and call you back by cell phone.
and the various entities are reconvening. We are now down on our special meeting agenda on item G for further discussion as to any matters related to today's topic. So I don't know which entity wants to go first, but I'll open up the floor.
Well, that's the City of Hayden.
Oh, we have outline. City of Hayden, you get to go first. I stand corrected.
So I believe that if all of the boards are in agreement with this, our proposed next step would be to have an independent study conducted evaluating the assets and any potential buyout if there were to be a dissolution, and have that study bifurcated from a rate study. And we would propose that the City of Hayden would pay for the rate study. And then the question is whether or not HARSB has funds to pay for the evaluation of assets study. If each of the boards is in agreement to move forward in that direction.
Thanks, Rhino. Yeah, we appreciate, those are the two key factors, right? Cost, we're hanging our hat on this cost analysis, which is paramount to us. And then how do we deal with assets? And so I think since the entities control HARSB, I think we can find the money in the budget to approve an asset study at HARSB's expense. And if you'll pick up the costs, we'd appreciate that. Those are the two key things that would help us move forward.
Correct, Jim Coleman, correct me if I'm wrong, I think that we have already in the budget money for doing a rate study, and not a rate study, but a
Cap fee analysis only.
cap fee analysis, but that's looks at assets. And it wouldn't take much more to do the add to the cap fee analysis and the rate study.
Our concern, or my concern with the rate study would be What if we hire an independent company to do that, and then we disagree on the dissolution? As you know, we sort of work through this process. If there's a disagreement, which we hope there isn't, we would like the opportunity to retain the company that does the rate study as our expert.
To what? To compel us to?
No. So the whole goal is to have a rate study conducted that says, hypothetically, if the city owns the system, what is the cost to the end users? And so that information, we would like to have ownership of that information, essentially. And we can disagree on that, that's okay.
If the district has some opportunity to look at the methods, you know.
Absolutely.
The methodology of how you're coming to those, I think that's fine.
And input, because everybody's going to need to provide input, yes.
Yeah, I don't want the city off doing it without any input from us.
No.
That will not happen.
Let's do it.
Kootenai? Think we're
Go for it.
we're in agreement?
Yes. Kootenai County Commissioners are in agreement.
Just a couple other things that came up in our group meeting that we probably ought to talk about. And you know, we there's a concern in our district that the city of Hayden doesn't go on a land grab and go up the north side of Lancaster and impact the watershed for Hayden Lake, which is part of our one of the reasons that the district was formed in the first place was protecting the Hayden Lake watershed. And so and I don't know, if it's not in the city of Hayden or the city of Hayden Lake's area of impact, the only way that could be protected is for have Kootenai County say, you know, your area impact doesn't extend up to here, and I don't see that as a fatal flaw. It's just a concern that some of our entities have, is that our constituents have, is that everybody's worked pretty hard to protect Hayden Lake, and we want some assurance that. I know Hayden wouldn't abuse it. We just don't want to give you the opportunity.
As a follow-up question to that, and maybe I'm going to ask your question, would you be asking in the context of any future agreement that the district have input in relationship to ACI negotiations in the watershed?
Yes.
So I think that there is a bill
There
that's
is.
being passed this year, so that may affect some of this. So
There's
the law
current
change.
legislation that's halfway through that's completely redefining ACI negotiations and leaving a lot more control with the counties.
Yeah.
That's key to Ed Short again. That's key to us. But also at the end of the day, we're all here because first of all, thank you everybody for being here. And it's a miracle for a bunch of essentially bureaucrats to get together. I talk about getting rid of bureaucracy. I mean, it's a pretty unique thing. We appreciate that. And at the end of the day, that's what matters to us, is that we have this conversation to gain and secure efficiencies. And if we don't get to that spot, that's probably the greatest hurdle for us, is that paramount above everything is that we find efficiencies in this process, we find cost savings to our constituents, and we lock that in perpetuity for our people, as well as it's important to everybody.
I think the next topic that would probably be beneficial before we concluded the meeting today is really a general discussion on what kind of timelines we would be looking at, not only for the various tasks which would be needing to be performed as part of a dissolution, but also for each of the public entities if a dissolution were to occur. I know that one of the complexities of this question is going to deal with the various entities' budget years, and when your allocation of funds is at a point where it can pivot or transition, which is going to be a necessity of any element of dissolution. So I'll open it up for input from the various entities in regards to your concerns for timelines.
So I probably, for the county, would be okay with taking a year to get the studies done, to get some of the agreements, which it sounds like Post Falls Rathdrum probably has a cookie cutter that we'll be able to not reinvent the wheel on that part. Because this is our budget season. I mean, I think it's everybody's budget season right now. So taking that year, because we've got to get through phase 2, we've got to get our permit. There's stuff that has to happen on the HARSB end because we can't even dissolve before that happens. So I would be comfortable with a year. So I'll still be here. So.
Leslie, I think you're absolutely, Jim Coleman, by the way, I think you're right. A year is probably a good goal. I liked, I think it was Brett's suggestion that we have, working groups between the entities that can get together more often than once a month, and as we go forward, maybe it's and figure out how to get these things done. What are the parameters in doing the rate study? What's the parameters in doing the expanding the capitalization and analysis to include asset allocations, things like that. So I think those are the things that I think putting together some working groups between the city and the district is a really good idea. It might speed it along, might get it done in 8 months.
Brett, do you have the Post Falls one? Could you forward it?
Yeah, I can. I've got just a paper copy here. I think I've got the electronic. I'll forward it out. You want me to just send it to you and Leslie, and you send it to whoever you want?
Send it to
Tina?
She'd like to word it.
Okay. I think we talked about the year would be good. We need, obviously this is going to be complicated and take some time, but to just have some continual progress and having some kind of working group put together to do this. There's I guess I described it as a window of opportunity because we know, and you described it at the end of phase 2, we're not in the middle of trying to negotiate in expenditure on a new project, and so there's that window of opportunity that we want to try to hit. So,
along with the Rapids agreement, there's several other. Boise is probably the king of agreements for wastewater treatment. They have, I think, at least 4, maybe even 5 sewer districts that they transport into Boise. And if we can get those agreements between the sewer districts and the city of Boise and how they do that, I think that would help us craft it, because I know at least one of those districts, I've been to court with Boise at least 3 times. So there's a lot of precedent set in those and how those costs are allocated and so on and so forth. So.
Yeah, we do their Boise's wastewater work, so I can track that down.
okay. I would also suggest that as we go through this, we may need to use Danielle. She's been integral in all the financial issues for you and for us and for HARSB, that she understands how these pieces can come together. And so I think authorizing to allow Danielle to help in this process is important as well.
To me, this is kind of a common sense thing, and pretty soon we'll be able to start messaging the public about our direction for the dissolution. And I can't imagine somebody running for office wouldn't see this as a win-win. So, I mean, that's for my 2 cents. But
I will guarantee this, that a year from now, the same people aren't sitting at this table, and change is tough. But I think if we're all of the mind that it's best for the constituents and it's best for the entities, and hopefully the people that come after us will continue to take that torch and move forward. And I think if as we propose it to them and explain it to them,
I like your optimism.
I got that from all the years in the sewer board. I was a pessimist till I came here.
Well, I think if we're far enough along.
I'm absolutely on board of keeping an open mind. However, if the facts don't play out the way that we hope they do, then we will make the choice for our constituents that's appropriate. And it might not be what you agree to.
Well, you have a responsibility to your Great Lakes.
Absolutely.
Just like we do, and if it doesn't work, it doesn't work, but I'm very optimistic of where we're at, we can make it work. So.
Well, the facts will bear that, so either way.
Moving us forward as far as the timeline's concerned, obviously, none of the entities here can take any action today. Any direction moving forward for our entities is going to need to go back before the governing body for action. What are some thoughts on what this group would like to see for a timeline to be able to go back and propose in regards to when this collective body perhaps meets again and or when we as entities appoint an individual or two to a working group that then starts collaborating to help formulate some of these ideas for dissolution?
Do you have a sense of who would do this rate study? Do we start there, make a couple proposals for consulting firms that would do that we agree on?
For rate study purposes, I think we'd like to put before our council as soon as possible some proposed companies and proposed costs for that. And I don't know how quickly we could get that done. Brett would have a better idea. But sooner rather than later. And also an appointment, they would need to make a decision with regards to appointment of individuals to a committee. So
can we agree to do that in 60 days or what?
Yes.
30 days?
I don't know about 30 days just because of our council meeting schedule.
Let's see, we've got 2 more meetings before.
But 60 days for sure.
Okay.
Okay.
I was thinking of the next HARSB meeting for at least, we're talking about having the group formed together, coming back with names to do that. As far as a rate study, we have a company that we've used previously for a rate study, and I assume we'll probably contact them, and they're already there. I don't know their availability, so we can give you an answer. I think probably further at the next HARSB meeting.
That'd be great. And Steph, do we have a CAFE analysis? Do we have that? Do we have a consultant picked out for that already, or what's this?
CAFE analysis, we asked for a quote from FCS, who has done our several previous ones. And what we did is they're willing to, I indicated after the construction scopes because there was be changing our CAFE. So we're looking at really fall at the earliest with possible agreement or a contract coming up in July or August.
That probably dictates part of this because the asset will be finally updated after phase 2. So I think maybe we put that on the agenda for next HARBs, that we ask FCS to expand CAFE analysis to include the asset and then put that into the report. Maybe that'll solve that problem. Ed Short, by the way, guys.
Is there a benefit that this group sees in attempting to identify perhaps a future date or timeline for this whole collective group to come back together and perhaps discuss as a whole what the working group is working on at some point?
We call it 90 days on that, is that? Yeah. Let's just make up random deadlines and see what happens.
I probably would ask for September, October. I think that would be a better than 90 days. Yeah, just because I think there's too many moving parts, and I don't even think our study is in this budget year, right, Steph? It's in the next budget year? Yeah, so HARBS won't even.
Do we not even have an update meeting, even in a skeleton sense?
No,
between now?
I agree with.
Well, here's what we can do is have the committee update HARBS, the HARBS board, and then the three of us take it back to our boards to say this is what the committee is, where they're at. So that would just be my thing.
Like collective in September or October.
Yeah.
I agree.
I think, I was going to say, that I think that makes sense to us too. September is about 6 months.
Mhm. There's just so much value in making sure everybody's hearing the same thing.
Mm-hmm. And I really want to get through the construction. Really want to get that tied up, because honestly, this is useless unless that construction gets done.
And for timing purposes, we're looking at midsummer for construction to be finished.
Actually, construction will be done by the end of June. However, there's a lot of paperwork that needs to happen after the dirt stops moving.
Thank you.
We're hoping for end of year, but it may be October.
That's end of September.
Yeah.
Well, and then we'll have to document the bond for Hayden after all that paperwork with DEQ is complete.
For purposes of the hypothetical working group that it sounds like the various entities are in support of moving toward, maybe one of the interesting components is the fact that we've got at least one of our entities whom, by having more than one representative in that working group, would create a quorum. So I think we're probably limited at maybe just one representative from each entity being in that working group. Obviously, I don't know, and it'll be up to the entities themselves in deciding whether or not somebody that's not a voting member of the governing body could also be included as part of that. I think the city represents a compelling case for that, and all the work that you, Brett, do on this. And so perhaps we could discuss two individuals from each entity, only one of which would be a voting member. But I think it's healthy to maybe have that discussion while we're all still here in the same room.
Neil, Hayden Lake Sewer District, I'm not quite understanding this. If we come back in September and October, no decision necessarily has to be made, only the information being shared. So we could have more than one board member.
So the commissioners can't. We cannot have two commissioners on the group. So if you wanted two from each entity, we cannot have two. We would have to have a non-voting member.
But we're talking about simply a discussion. We're not talking about decision-making at this
So
point.
two separate issues. We're talking about the working group right now. Who's going to be on the working group? So the
Working group meaning decision-making?
No, they're working, gathering the Post Falls Rathdrum agreement. They're gathering all the parts to this thing. Yeah, so it doesn't matter if we're making decisions or not. We're going to have to make a decision eventually. So we can't be on the same group.
So that we're talking about the working group and the number that's there, and no decisions would be made, but we would be working to answer the questions, the concerns, working on just putting all of this together. And I would suggest, we had a slight discussion on this, of having like our two representatives that come, our alternate and our main person, so two there, and then maybe having myself and maybe Alan there, just because we have different knowledge sets, you know, technical and financial, and you have two folks that come and you could have the same. I don't think it harms to have, you know, we'd say I have to have four people, per group, and then if you can't have two, you could have, I don't know, somebody from the airport or something that is aware of the sewer. So I throw that out there, but I think it would be helpful, not to gang up on anybody, but helpful in moving things forward with the knowledge sets that we each have. Does that make sense? Is that, I don't think it's, I mean, if two, 3, or 4 of you wanted to be there.
Then they would have a quorum. Yeah, they can't do.
Oh, you'd have a quorum too?
Yeah, they can only have 2.
All right, well, I won't decide for you. Over Zoom. Is that, I guess, is that acceptable to the district if we came with 4 people?
100%, yeah. More people involved, as long as we can, we're not arm wrestling for this thing.
It's not like a vote, we get 4 votes, you get 2.
Exactly.
It's not that kind of thing. It's just,
Right.
it's to be there to be helpful.
Exactly, which is actually what the goal is, to
More
move this
accurate
thing forward.
information you can have
Yeah.
at the time.
I think dialogue's the important thing here, not necessarily who's winning or losing.
Yeah. There's just some good minds. There may be times where we have a meeting that we're gonna wanna invite someone else to come, like it might be Danielle to come, or Ken needs to come, or something like that.
Do we want to discuss perhaps who would be responsible and have the lead on scheduling and coordinating the working group?
I vote you.
I was gonna say Ben.
Second.
I guess my feeling is, because this is primarily going to be a decision between these two entities, the city and the district, I think it's important that these two entities be the core of the working group. If we need the referee for the county, do that. But I think this is just a working, it's not a decision. It's just to hash out what things is important, not important, what are the, bring in the experts that we need to, attorneys, design engineers, and people that are necessary. Stephanie.
I was actually going to suggest our board consult with legal and see what legal suggests, because I wasn't actually planning on being involved. I was going to wait till you guys figured it out and say, yeah, looks good for the county, okay, or doesn't. So that's kind of where I was thinking, because honestly, that's why I've been here for 4 years, is to try to get to this place where we can get resolution, and all that, and we don't have to be the referee, so.
We can coordinate that. I think we can do that. If that's acceptable to everybody.
Scott Purcell, do we have a time frame on how long it would take to do a rate study? Does anybody know? Throw out a.
Probably
4 to 6 months.
4 to 6 months.
4 to 6 months, okay. Are we planning it, if the district is all right with it, are we going to try to find a third party that can do the rate study? Because I'd like to get their input on that right from the get-go, and I'd like it, if we can do it, I'd like to see it get started now.
We have to put it before council, but yes.
Okay, certainly, I wasn't trying to make a decision.
Logistics.
To put before council. Let's get it started. At least, I should say, let's get it before council so council can decide if it should get started now.
Jim Coleman, I guess the only thing that I would say is that, I think most of the people that you've used in the past for your rate studies do good work, but I think I would at least like to see who you're going to use and say, yeah, I think they'll do a good job.
I mean, we haven't finalized, but the company that we've used is FCS. If you're acceptable to them, I know HARSB has used them for some of their work. They're in Spokane. They understand our infrastructure and what we're doing, but if that's not acceptable, let us know either from the county or.
They're fine. They're good.
Okay.
So for clarity, based on what I heard from Stephanie, FCS would be providing a service on both components of this, but we would be very specifically asking them to keep the individuals who work on the separate components very separate so that they can maintain their objectivity and so that we get two independent reports. That's the concern with using the same company.
We have FCS on the schedule for asset
Yes.
at the end of the construction project to redo the cap fees. So that would not conflict with the rate study.
Thank you.
At this point, it's Nancy Sanchez and Billy McCourt.
Okay.
I don't know if that's who has done yours in the past.
We've used Angie past, and she's had a couple of people help.
All right, is there anything further while we're all in the room? Because I know how difficult it is to coordinate things once we have to revert to email. So any other thing, timeline, meeting coordination wise or otherwise? Would anybody benefit from having an additional clarification from our bond counsel, since she's here still, on what specific obligations each of the entities are under financially right now related to projects for HARSB, so that way the entities can have a better understanding of what each other are under obligation for?
I think that would be good.
Danielle Quaid. It's pretty, I think it's pretty simple too, but maybe everybody doesn't know. But the city, through a judicial validation back in 2016, authorized a revenue bond. So the city has an obligation, and it's ongoing in this second phase. It's being paid for by a DEQ SRF loan, but will issue a revenue bond for their portion of the Phase 2 project. Revenue bonds are repaid through O&M, which is charged just to City of Hayden residents. The district has a local improvement district that funded the most of the Phase 1 components. A local improvement district is an obligation that's created on properties within the district that is equal to the benefit that they receive for the improvements and the access to services that they get. So that is already finalized through, it was also financed through a DEQ SRF loan. Like I said, it's an obligation to property, so it's very different than O&M. It's paid like a property tax and can result in a lien on property. And as I said kind of at the beginning, that is something that we view would have to stay with the district. There's not a clean and straightforward way to transfer those obligations to the city. So that needs to be taken into account in the project, or in this project, in the resulting agreements. Does anybody have any specific questions?
Matt Roeder with the City of Hayden. For Danielle, do you see any other possible financial obstacles that would prevent disillusionment?
No.
So it could all be cleanly done?
Yes, I think it's possible, because both of you, and this is a good time to do it, like Brett said, because we're finishing this Phase 2 project, and there's no new project on the horizon. Because as soon as there's a new project, especially a regulatory-driven project on the horizon, then we have to go back to the, Stephanie's spreadsheet and do all these individual financing mechanisms. We've been lucky too, because the county's portion is so small that they've been able to pay with cash. But if we had to roll in a financing methodology for the county, it would be, that much more complex.
And that was a perfect explanation and sort of wraps back around to the beginning of our conversation. And for my council members that might not, that I can connect those dots for, what Danielle just described is there needed to be this construction, and HARSB came to the entities and said, we need this work done. I'm just being really basic. and each of the entities had different funding mechanisms and or borrowing abilities available to them. So Danielle worked a multifaceted spider, if you will, to pull together funds for the project for HARBS that required multiple different financing opportunities, and what she just described was the result of that.
Any other questions for Danielle related to financing? Okay, any other last items or questions for discussion as a group? Okay, hearing none, it sounds like maybe our parting directive, and anyone can follow me up and tell me if I'm not accurate on this. Each of the various entities are going to likely need to go back and have placed on their agenda an action for appointment of individuals to a working group as a preliminary matter. Staff can have that topic placed on the next HARBS agenda to update HARBS as a entity in regards to who will be representing each of the individual entities on that working group and coordinate rolling out a plan for meeting schedules and timelines for that working group. Staff will coordinate a date looking at roughly the September timeframe for this collective body to come back together as a whole. And HARBS in the meantime will keep this matter as a rolling agenda item for continual update each month in the interim to ensure we're tracking the progress of a working group and moving forward so that way they can stay apprised of where the various entities are individually working toward finding answers and solutions to the questions that were raised here today by the group. Is there anything else I'm neglecting to include in a recap? Okay, hearing none, my thanks to every one of the entities for being here. My thanks to everyone for working together. I know this process is not easy or quick, but I think that the collective body working together, to echo Ed's words earlier, is paramount to the success of HARBS. So my thanks and happy St. Patrick's Day.
Yes. Thank you, everybody, and thank you, Stephanie, for the delicious goodies.
Most of you